Dear Clifton, dear Mary Neal, it's great to have you here too. It's wonderful. Dear all, welcome to the Zeughaus, to the armory, which was built just a few years before the outbreak of the endless 30 Years' War. The 3rd of November 2022. Susanne Pattberg is once again on site and presents artist books to Sarah Janke and me. We discuss, consider, select, everything as usual. Everything as usual, suddenly not anymore. To be honest, it was a flash. Dead Life by Clifton Meador. You can see parts of the book in the background, I hope. Yes, not this, but you. Sarah and I didn't want to see anything else. Today, more than 2 years later, Clifton Meador is sitting here as the winner of our 5th Artists' Book Prize. Congratulations. I can't speak for Sarah, but how can I explain my fascination? Clifton himself provides an answer. Quote, Dead Life Project Statement. In 2013, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam made high-resolution scans of more than 700,000 objects in their collection freely available. Trapped by the pandemic, I, Clifton, stumbled across this collection and became fascinated by the material wealth of the Netherlands during the 17th century. The Rijksmuseum's collection is a staggering record of the display of wealth, and I started wondering about the sources of that wealth. Unquote. That's the background. Now, quote, Dead Life recombines images of Dutch paintings of the 17th century to collapse these representations of an excess of material wealth in 2 distinct images. I color separated images of selected paintings, extracted different color information from each, and recombined those colors to make images where the issue of representation of wealth and identity, is the main focus of the work. Unquote. Does that explain my fascination? Yes, it does. But let me add a sentence or two anyway. In 1987, the British historian Simon Schema, in German we often say Simon Schama, published a history of Dutch culture in the so-called Golden Age. In the German translation, its title was Überfluss und schöner Schein. My translation could be abundance and beautiful appearance, but I'm not sure if it's correct. In the original, however, the book was called something else. Its title is The Embarrassment of Riches. No question, Clifton, your recombinations, your overwritings do indeed turn the portraits and still lives into representations of wealth and identity. But I think your palimpsests also make these representations fragile, hybrid, and irritating. Indeed, in the sense of an embarrassment of riches. That is, I would like to say, great art. And that's what makes these and other works of yours so fascinating for me. Ihnen allen ganz herzlichen Dank für Ihr Kommen. Schön, dass Sie in so großer Zahl hier sind. Danke an alle in der Bibliothek, die diesen Abend möglich gemacht haben. Danke an Sarah Janke und Laura Spuria für die Online-Ausstellung Dead Life. Sie sehen hier einiges davon. Danke wieder mal an unsere Jury, die fast vollständig da ist. Nicoline Kästner kann heute nicht, aus guten Gründen, sonst wäre sie da. Und danke natürlich an die Curt, Mast, Jägermeister Stiftung. Frau Puschnerus wird ja selbst noch ein paar Worte sprechen. Danke schließlich an Susanne Packberg für ihre Laudatio, die wir gleich hören werden.
Clifton Meador, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine große Ehre, auch in diesem Jahr ein ganz kurzes Grußwort anlässlich der Verleihung des Künstlerbuchpreises, auch im Namen unseres Vorstandsvorsitzenden Florian Riem und unseres Stiftungsrats, Professor Helm ist heute Abend auch hier, für Sie zu halten. Erneut geht dieser Preis mit dem renommierten Buchkünstler und Fotografen Clifton Meador an einen herausragenden Künstler. Mit seinem Werk Endless War, endloser Krieg, das sich dem 30-jährigen Krieg widmet, gelingt es dem Künstler nicht nur, die Vergangenheit lebendig werden zu lassen, sondern auch eine Brücke ins Hier und Heute zu schlagen, in eine Zeit, in der Konflikte und Kriege auf der ganzen Welt jeden Tag weiterhin Leid und Zerstörung verursachen. Umso wichtiger ist es, aus der Geschichte zu lernen. Denn, wie Winston Churchill seinerzeit schon so passend feststellte, je weiter man zurückblicken kann, desto weiter wird man vorausschauen. Ich gratuliere Clifton Meador daher ganz herzlich zu seiner wohlverdienten Auszeichnung und danke ihm für seinen wertvollen Beitrag zur Kunst- und Erinnerungskultur. May your work, dear Clifton Meador, inspire us to learn from history and build a more peaceful future. At a time when democratic values are under pressure worldwide, it is up to each of us to stand up for peace and democracy. Your work is yet another reminder of this, and I thank you for this and congratulate you warmly on your impressive and meaningful work. Ich danke Ihnen für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und wünsche uns allen einen inspirierenden Abend.
Guten Abend, dir Clifton, dir Mary Neal. Wie wunderbar, so einen vollen Saal zu haben, wie wunderbar, so ein großes Interesse hier heute Abend zu haben und wie noch wunderbarer, dass es diesen Preis überhaupt gibt. Inzwischen macht es sich immer mehr breit, die Information über diesen Preis. In Amerika wird sehr, sehr stark aufmerksam darauf gemacht, dass es den gibt. Und ich habe dazu eine ganz schöne Begegnung, die ich Ihnen gerne mit erzählen möchte. Ich habe oft die Ehre, dass ich in Amerika von Studenten Bücher zeigen darf, so auch in Cliftons arbeiten, auch in Amerika lösen sie genau das aus, was Sie, Herr Burschel, so schön beschrieben haben. Ich durfte es vor Studenten zeigen, und zwar das VOC, was Sie hier immer wieder sehen, wo also die ganzen Errungenschaften der sogenannten, der VOC, der ostindischen Kompanie gezeigt werden, beziehungsweise die ganzen Besitztümer des Eismuseums. Endlose Schiffsmodelle, endlose Fahnen, endlose alle möglichen Errungenschaften dieser Kolonialzeit. Ich habe das Buch gezeigt, das fängt damit an, dass es eben auch das alte Buch zitiert, was, wie sich dann über Cliftons Arbeit herausstellt, tatsächlich eine Art PR dieser VOC war, was wir aber immer als historisches Dokument wahrnehmen, was aber tatsächlich eigentlich Werbepamphlete waren oder koloniale Pamphlete waren. In dieser Bibliothek oder in dieser Hochschule war es tatsächlich so, dass die das Original hatten. Und die Bibliothekarin, die mich eingeladen hatte, hat das Original neben das Buch von Clifton gelegt. Das heißt, wir hatten zweimal inhaltlich genau dieselbe Seite, nämlich das Postulat dieser Handelsgesellschaft. Die Studentinnen zu einem Mädchencollege kamen rein und sind sofort auf Cliftons Arbeit gekommen. Natürlich farbige Arbeit als erstes. Und sind da reingestiegen, haben angefangen zu lesen, haben entziffern können, haben das sogar verstanden und haben das alte Buch links liegen lassen. Und erst dann, als sie das wirklich näher betrachtet haben und festgestellt haben, sie sind unmittelbaren Bezug zum alten Buch, haben sie sich getraut, an das alte Buch ranzugehen. Mit der Begründung, seltsam. Zu den alten Büchern bin ich immer so distant und so respektvoll. Und ich nehme sie immer als das, als Wahrheit, als Bibel. Das alte Buch ist immer die Bibel, die meine Wahrheit verkündet. Und ich fand es so großartig zu sehen, dass durch Cliftons Arbeit eine gegenwärtige künstlerische Sicht, tatsächlich nicht durch eine wissenschaftliche, sondern eine künstlerische Sicht, der Blick auf das alte Buch sich verändert hat oder möglich wurde für die jungen Leute. Und dass das ermöglicht wird, finde ich, ist auch ein Aspekt dieses Preises. Und dafür möchte ich Ihnen wirklich von Herzen danken, dass Sie den ins Leben gerufen haben und so beherzt fortführen und so beherzt in die Welt tragen. Und das finde ich ganz wunderbar, weil es der zeitgenössischen Buchkunst eine große Möglichkeit gibt, zu sagen, wir schaffen jetzt, dass das übermorgen Vergangenheit ist. Also wir schaffen jetzt Zukunft, die aber eine Anbindung an Vergangenheit hat. Aber das kommt natürlich umso mehr dir zugute, weil du genauso arbeitest, lieber Cliff. Ich spreche jetzt auf Deutsch, was ich über deine Arbeit denke, you know already know. Ich freue mich sehr, nicht nur freue ich mich, sondern es ist mir wirklich auch eine große Ehre, über deine Arbeit zu sprechen. Clifton Meador, 1957 in den amerikanischen Südstaaten geboren. Wir müssen uns vorstellen, er hat mir das so bildlich erzählt, in einer Zeit, in der es tatsächlich noch Rassentrennung gab, in der es Auswirkungen von Kolonialismus gab, in der es Herrenmenschen und Sklavenmenschen gab, wie er da als weißer Mann aufgewachsen ist und was sicher ganz stark seine Weltsicht geprägt hat und dann seine soziale Sicht geprägt hat. Clifton hat dann einerseits Fotografie und Grafikdesign und Buchmachen studiert und das ist was ich auch sehr herausragend finde, sehr viel gereist. Hatte die unterschiedlichen Scholarships, aber auch in Ländern wie Schottland oder aber eben auch in Tiflis oder in China oder in Russland, also quer durch den Norden, in Tibet lange gereist und geforscht, in Orten, wo man jetzt nicht unbedingt so gleich mal hinkommt und nicht unbedingt forscht, was natürlich seinen Blick auf die Welt und seinen Blick und sein Verständnis für Sprache, für Menschen, für Leben sehr geprägt hat. In Büchern, die Elternleitung sind, die Sie jetzt hier in dieser Schau nicht sehen, werden Sie sehen, er hat unglaublich viel fotografisch interpretiert eigentlich. Wir haben eine Ausstellung gehabt, die haben wir genannt, Denken durch Drucken. Und viele seiner frühen Bücher sind tatsächlich rein fotografiebasiert. Und die Fotografien sind so manipuliert im Sinne, dass manche Dinge einfach farblich hervorgehoben sind oder dass sie Geschichten erzählen, die Fotobücher auf diese intensive und diese so persönliche Weise sehr selten erzählen können, in meinen Augen. Und das ist tatsächlich nicht über die Fotografie, sondern über diese Druckmanipulationen passiert. Wenn ich Druckmanipulationen sage, meine ich nicht AI-generierte Fotografie oder Photoshop-manipulierte Fotografie, sondern Manipulationen, die tatsächlich auf den Dokumenten beruhen, auf den Fotografien der Dokumente. Sie haben eben von den Porträts gesprochen. Wenn Sie hier in den unterschiedlichen Fotografien Porträts sehen, nehmen wir das immer sofort wahr als das Porträt eines Menschen. Es ist nie das Porträt eines Menschen. Es sind immer 4 Porträts, die übereinander gelagert sind. Und jedes Porträt ist in einer besonderen Farbe gedruckt. Das heißt, wir wollen einen Menschen sehen oder das Porträt eines Menschen sehen. Und Clifton Meador möchte zeigen, es geht nicht um den Einzelnen, es geht um Machtpositionen, es geht um eben diese Position des mächtigen Menschen im Porträt. Und das ist was wir aber als die eine Person annehmen, die eine Person, die aus welchem Grund noch immer Macht hat. Genauso ist es bei diesem Buch VOC, wo man dann ein Schiff wahrnimmt. Das Schiff ist aber nie ein Schiff, sondern das Schiff sind 4 verschiedene Schiffe. Es geht nie um das Einzelne oder das Spezifische, sondern es geht um das Ding an sich. Und das ist was ich sehr, sehr spannend finde. Sie werden das auch später sehen, wenn es ein neues Buch zeigt. Es geht nie um den einzelnen Krieger, es geht auch nicht um die Abbildung des einzelnen Kriegers, es geht um die Position dieses einzelnen Kriegers, um das Kriegerische. Und deswegen ist auch der endlose Krieg nicht nur in dem spezifischen Fall der endlose 30-jährige Krieg, sondern der Krieg als Phänomen an sich, der endlos bis heute weitergeht und schon immer da gestanden hat. Und das ist was mich fasziniert an seiner Sicht, dass es eben in einer Weise eine politische Buchkunst ist, die historisch basiert ist, und zwar historisch-politisch basiert, ohne dass es gibt sehr viel politische Buchkunst, die so einmal ins Gesicht ist. Ne? So, und das ist eben bei Clifton Meador nie und nimmer der Fall. Die sind immer auf eine Weise subtil. Sie müssen immer genau hingucken und das ist was ich ungemein schätze. Ich kann Ihnen nur sagen, wenn er nachher das neue Buch zeigt, und das ist sehr umfangreich und sehr großartig, finde ich, schauen Sie auf die Details. Schauen Sie auf die Details, die es immer wieder erlauben, dass man sich identifiziert, dass man sich wiederfindet und dass man plötzlich Dinge ins Gesicht kriegt, die man vorher nicht wahrgenommen hat. Und das ist eine große, große Qualität, die aber tatsächlich durch das Bearbeiten von vorgefundenen Bildern passiert. Er hat so schön gesagt, er ist kein Wissenschaftler, er ist Künstler. Er zitiert aber wie ein Wissenschaftler. Er zitiert, indem er Bilder in sein eigenes Narrativ bindet, die aber vorher da waren, die man gerne aber übersehen hat. Und durch diese Form des manipulativen Druckens, des Überdruckens und des Highlightens, finde ich, ist eine Qualität entstanden, die ich so auf diese Weise auch noch nie gesehen habe. Ich bin auf der anderen Seite, wenn Sie dann schauen, dieses Cotton Curtain oder auch das Dad-Buch, ist ja tatsächlich auf Baumwolle gedruckt, auf feste Baumwolle. Also der Bezug zu diesem Baumwollkrieg in den Südstaaten ist physisch da. Wenn Sie das Buch blättern, sind Sie genau im Gegenstand, also im Objekt des Subjekts sozusagen. Und ich finde, das ist was sich da transportiert und transformiert sich so viel rein im Betrachten dieses einen Buches, dass man dem kaum widerstehen kann. Es gibt ganz viele Leute, die immer sagen, ja, wo ist der Text? Es ist wirklich ein Narrativ und es ist ein erzähltes Buch, aber es braucht keinen oder kaum Text. Die Textbücher, die er gemacht hat, sind wiederum so, dass dort der Text vom Bild wird. Die haben wir aber heute hier nicht als Gegenstand, wo er praktisch diese Umdrehung macht. Wird auf einmal der Text ein Bild. Fotografie und sozusagen ist eine ganz wichtige Frage. Und visuelle Forschung und visuelles Erzählen sind ein anderes wichtiges Moment. Und diese subtile Form politischer Aklamation oder wie auch immer Sie es nennen wollen. Und dieses Zurückgeben der Frage, was sehe ich, was will ich sehen und was will er, dass ich sehe. Und das ist was wir, glaube ich, sehr, sehr stark in deinen Büchern sehen können. Und ich freue mich, dass Sie, oder wir alle zusammen, dieses neue Buch sehen können. Und ich freue mich so sehr, dass du diesen Preis bekommst. Wer hätte es mehr verdient als du? So, I would like to congratulate you most sincerely on receiving the Artist Book Prize of the Herzog Bibliothek of Wolfenbüttel, which you now sincerely deserve and which will now be ceremonially presented to you, dear Cliff. Thank you. Congrats. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is great. I know what to do with this actually. Study this. The fact that the library and Mast, Jägermeister Stiftung supports this kind of work, I think is so important now. There's a darkness gathering in the world, and I think that holding a candle up of scholarship and artistic creativity is really important. So thank you so much. I'm deeply honored to get this prize, but even more honored, I think, to have had the opportunity to work here and to make something out of it. And so I thought I'd read some parts of the new book. How does that sound? Because it's not like everybody says. I'm going to switch it to something of a new experience for me. So if I don't hit the table too much, it won't jiggle too much. I would hate for you all to get motion sick. So here's the book that was really just finished a few weeks ago. And it's still I'm going to read some from at least 2 parts of it. The book is in 5 or 6 parts, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it would take far too long. But I'd like to give you a sense of the experience of reading the book, which is what this is all about. I make books that use the experience of the book as the primary means of expression. So I think of the book as a medium rather than a container. So everything about the book is important. So let's start. Endless War. The past doesn't exist. But we pretend to know something about the past. So how do we know anything about the past? Artists, poets, and writers create the past by imagining it. How do they imagine the past? They draw on their hopes, fears, and experiences. How do we read images from the past? When we see tiny printed figures trudging along the road, we see ourselves in these inky scratches. Looking at these lines opens a window. We think we see a beautiful walled town on a river, apparently prosperous, orderly, and well defended. I imagine myself in the boat, crossing the river to the village outside the walls, or perhaps rowing far down the river toward the sea, to a much bigger river port, a place where ships and boats land cargo from faraway places. I've heard that the brewers here will pay better prices for my barley. Maybe I'll be able to sell my crop here. The brewers offered a good price, so I took the money and started rowing home, but only after drinking a few beers. Nearly home again, I stopped in the church to arrange my tithe. I've held back some of the barley from my harvest, since I'd rather tithe with grain than with money. And so finally, home again, grateful to the artist who imagined this place. So how do we know about war? Only from the imagination of artists, writers, and poets. How does war start? This war starts with printed paper, contested beliefs, and an open window in Prague. Martin Luther invented an industry as a means to a ministry. Luther opposed the Roman Catholic Church's sale of plenary indulgences, certificates that promised to reduce the temporal punishment in purgatory for sins committed by the purchaser. Luther argued that the sale of indulgences led Christians to avoid true repentance and sorrow for sin, believing that they could simply buy forgiveness. Luther's 95 Theses, which were his arguments against the corruption of the church from the sale of indulgences, were quickly printed in 1517 and widely distributed. And the Catholic Church immediately understood this as a challenge to their wealth, power, and authority. The medium of printed sheets of paper carried a religious revolution throughout Northern Europe with surprising success. Kings and princes, chafing under the political authority of the Catholic Church, rapidly adopted the Lutheran faith in rebellion against the autocratic power of Rome. Lutheranism became as much a political statement as a confession of faith. The Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg dynasty remained staunchly Catholic, tied to the existing power of the Church. But they developed a policy of tolerance for the Lutherans that lasted several decades. The spread of Protestantism, with its emphasis on an individual relationship with God, unmediated by institutions such as the Church, was a significant challenge to the established authority of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther swiftly understood the power of printing and published dozens of short texts as pamphlets in vernacular language. A flood of printing came from Wittenberg. Dozens of printers set up print shops to deal with the demand. But at the same time, another flood, a single, easily distributed sheet of paper, which combined text and image, became a ubiquitous medium, and news became an idea. These broadsides were read aloud in public places, in markets, in pubs, at gatherings, and the images told stories in ways that language cannot. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. That's a quote from Frederick Douglass. Luther's protest was spread by the printed words and images, and the way people knew the world was changed. And what we know of their world is barely visible through the printed words and images that have randomly survived the centuries of wars. So many wars. So I'm going to skip ahead. This next section is more of a background history of the 30 Years' War, the political situations, and I was writing for an American audience in this part, which hopefully you all know already. The Americans, I will say, know almost nothing of the 30 Years' War. So the contest between the Protestants and the Catholics that I feel came to a head in the Bohemian Revolt, at the election of Frederick V as the King of Bohemia, was, I think, the triggering moment. Then it all starts, of course, with the comet. And the Holy Roman Emperor sending 2 representatives to Prague to enforce his rule in Prague. And Bohemian nobles threw them out the window. The defenestration of Prague. And again, this part of the book, this is an organizational chart of the Holy Roman Empire, which I found entertaining. And then the seals of the various electors of the Holy Roman Emperor, who was in an elected position. Frederick V as the lunar king. And a picture at his coronation of the 2 views of religion. The Protestant view of a peaceful, obviously prosperous world, and the demonically possessed Catholic world. At least that's what the Protestants thought. And then the battle, this first part of this contest culminates the Battle of White Mountain, where the Protestants were roundly defeated by the imperial armies. And the people who had rebelled in Bohemia were executed and tortured in the town square of Prague. One of the things I was very interested in
was the idea that this was the moment that professional armies started to arrive. The 30 Years' War was the first time there became armies that weren't levies of peasants. And so this section introduces, Christian IV and the King of Sweden. And I found these manuals of how to be a proper soldier. And so this is a section of this Waffenhandlung, which teaches would-be professional soldiers how to be a professional soldier. And I've taken images from 3 different books and recombined them. This kind of image looks something like people dancing like that. The 30 Years' War heated up clusters of violence that connected long-brewing conflicts. The war that erupted was waged by regular and irregular military forces, partisan groups, private armies, and conscripts. War had a profound evolutionary impact on European societies, transforming entire classes of societies, both on and off the battlefield. It was the first total war. New kinds of fighting forces emerged in this war. Instead of levies of peasants who were herded into battle poorly trained and armed only with pointy things, professional soldiers, trained to use the new technologies of war, artillery, muskets, and arquebuses, formed companies, often as mercenaries. These professional mercenary troops carried out atrocities with utter impunity and were often self-funding, looting and pillaging as they moved across Central and Eastern Europe, leaving deforested and ruined lands in their wake. And a new breed of war profiteer came to the fore. People like Albrecht von Wallenstein, who sought to promote hostilities for personal gain. Von Wallenstein looked to turn a profit from one campaign to fund the next. War became an industry in its own right. Profiteers plundered resources at every opportunity to sustain their business model, leaving entire regions devastated, precisely like our contemporary wars. One of the things I was fortunate enough to do was I get to travel to Lützen, where the great battle where the king of Sweden was killed on a battlefield. And I thought this somehow epitomized the foolishness of these kind of wars. And my great friend Claudia Mann was kind enough to drive me out there. And there are excerpts from English language contemporary accounts of this battle that I excerpted visually, but I also wrote about it. The fields of Lützen were being plowed after a harvest of grain. There's no evidence of the bloody battle that had happened here hundreds of years ago, a place where thousands of soldiers and a king died on these fields. But this harvest was incomplete, and some grain was still standing uncut. There's been a great deal of battlefield archaeology of this particular battlefield, and there's now a little museum that's recently opened that explains some of this history and displays, I believe, one of the mass graves they discovered while they were investigating this area. Underneath, so here's Gustavus Adolphus getting ready to send his troops into battle, mustering the troops, and he's exhorting the troops to be courageous and throw their lives away as quickly as possible. The imperial forces lined up on one side of the road, and the Protestant forces led by the King of Sweden on the other. And they engaged, and it was truly a bloody, bloody battle. It's hard to imagine what happened. Thousands of soldiers died on the field that day. Of course, this pile of fertilizer in the field was really evocative for me. And he was shot in the middle of the charge. So Gustavus Adolphus led a charge across the road, was shot, fell, and his body wasn't found for a day. But when it was found, they built a little monument to him there. They put a stone in the spot where supposedly his body fell and built a baldacchino over it. and thinking about what this soil really contains. Just something. I looked at a lot of these broadsheet prints here at the library that represented different aspects of the battle, and I came away with some sort of generalized ideas about how war was represented. But this idea of utter destruction and desolation was not present in prints at first. It was, I felt, a kind of trope that they followed, where the leaders of the nobility would be in the foreground, and the highly expendable troops who were anonymously rendered as just sort of stick figures in the background. And these earlier representations of the battle were often like this. And as we went along in time, we saw more and more fallen soldiers depicted on these pictures. I thought it was hard to tell whether the leader here was about to hit them or encourage them. These are very tiny details, often only a couple centimeters across from these larger engravings that report them. The masked pikemen often looked like standing fields of grain. And their understanding of ballistics was incomplete. And I tried to imagine myself in these battles, and I know what I would have done, which is run away as fast as I could. And I looked through these images looking for people running away, and there were not that many, but there were occasional people either running one way or the other. The sense of confusion was intense. There are often poignant details that were upsetting, with this pregnant woman who's lying clearly wounded, the dead around her. And then these three soldiers sneaking off into the swamp that would have been there, I think. Are more and more dead as the understanding of ballistics improved over the course of the war. And the feature of the 30 Years' War, of course, was the enormous number of refugees fleeing these towns, trying to find a safe place to live. And this image particularly struck me as looking like some of Matthew Brady's pictures of the devastation of the American Civil War in the buildings. And so this last section we're going to read is Nicholas Kell's great suite of prints of the misfortunes of war, which I tried to turn into war shot images to somehow talk about the horror of war. Wars eventually end, as much from exhaustion as from victory. Empires fall and power realigns, but the rich and powerful are zealous in maintaining their rank. So this war was brutal and continued for more than a generation. Imagine the impact of a 50-gram musket ball with a slash of a saber delivered from a horsed soldier, or the stab of a pike with a sudden impact of artillery shrapnel, any of them against the fragile sacks of our bodies. Imagine that acrid smoke of gunpowder as a dense fog on the battlefield, maimed bodies in piles, blood soaking into the earth, the smell of death in the air, the screams of the wounded, and mind-numbing, deafening artillery blasts. Imagine the exhausted and wounded struggling back into camp, which was a cesspit of non-existent hygiene, latrines overflowing into streams, filthy water to drink, scant food to eat, and forage stolen and rotten potatoes boiled into a watery soup. Diseases erupted in close quarters. The greed, vanity, and ambitions of the powerful always leave little except a rotting and dismembered carcass. Famine is a cavalryman whose black horse tramples fields, the surviving crops rotting in the cold winter rain, the remaining farmers driven off their land by the horsemen. War is a king in dazzling raiment, riding a red horse, surrounded by a retinue of sycophants, courtiers, and lick-spittle hedge fund managers. The bands of newly professionalized soldiers demanded pay, and currencies were debased to pay them. The king's bootlickers bought coins, melted them down, then recast them with base metals, replacing the precious. The cost of food exploded. Pestilence is a knight astride a pale horse, armor gleaming, weapons burnished and sharpened to a withering edge. A loyal member of the king's court, feasting on the displacement of so many people, unhoused, unfed, weakened by stress, easy victims of war. Villages left in ruin, houses burned and turned to rubble by artillery, were sacked by desperate refugees. Entire forests devastated as waves of soldiers clear-cut whole stands of trees for firewood during the 29 winters of this war. Cities besieged and refugees frantic to find a place of safety, of warmth, and of food. Between the conflicts, famines, plagues, and deaths from all causes, somewhere between 4 and 8 million people died. The population in parts of Germany fell by half. Kings, emperors, and nobles demand to have their wills obeyed and observed by lesser folk, who are simply part of the instrumentality of their domains. The common folk are beneath consideration, not real people, but simply serfs, servants, peasantry, expendable. Medieval wars were fought by levies of peasants who were herded into battle as cattle for killing, while the nobles engaged in glorious, chivalrous combat, war destriers, armored and prepared, distant from the mud, blood, and disease of battle. The 30 Years' War signaled a new kind of warfare, and new technologies of death were wielded with new expertise. Those quaint muskets, arquebuses, and pikes were succeeded by repeating rifles, Gatling guns, aerial bombs, battle tanks, poison gas, grenade launchers, landmine, fuel-air bombs, nuclear weapons, and war drones. Feudalism itself was giving way to new forms of autocracy. We have a kind of feudalism now that ennobles those with endless appetites. Wars have always been started and encouraged by the rich and powerful, and these new nobility see war as a means to an end. This new feudalism is largely corporate, and our emperors are elected by boards of directors charged with extracting money from suffering. How else to describe for-profit healthcare, or the arms industry, or privatized prisons, or modern mercenary corporations, or any internet company manipulating threats and promises to extract money? How else to explain the endless pursuit of war in our world, except as evidence of endless greed, endless vanity, and endless lust for power, while the world fills with endless corpses? Thank you.